Okay, this is video 3 in our series of installing DSFW, or Domain Services for Windows. We just went through some preparation for installing DSFW. This a quick tid just to follow, get some key points on installing DSFW gotchas that you want to look at. Now we're going to get on to the install. Again, if you're familiar with OES, you know it's an add-on product, so you can do this at the time of installing SLES, or you can have a SLES server and go from there. If you're like me, I just have a VM of a SLES server ready to go so I can install whatever I need to on it. So we're going to go, as this is getting ready and pulling up, and quickly just show you the documentation. And they did a wonderful job on the documentation. Prerequisites for the install, goes the planning, install scenario, so we have our non-name map, our name map, installing a forest root domain. Forest root domain is your very first domain in your tree. That is the very top. And you cannot have a sibling domain at this level. That would be called another tree. So at this time, it's one tree, one domain. One tree, one forest. So in our forest, which would be set up at this level, if we wanted another O, that we would not be able to install a domain at that O. At least not this time. Maybe in a future release of Domain Services for Windows, we'll have that ability. And again, that would be called another tree within your forest if we had that ability. This time, one tree to one forest. So YAST, we're going to use our repository and let that set up. So go back to the install. So like I said, in the install, wonderful pictures there to help you to go through the install. It has for there's different limitations, things inside your container names. Definitely want to go through these. They're all not in that TID, but so just things to consider. You cannot have a NetBIOS name of security or schema. There's a different things to consider. We are, in this case, we don't. The biggest things are your names of containers inside your domain. That's where I see the most failures. Specifically, users container. That is very common to see in smaller environments when you just have a few hundred users, say. They generally have just a user's container. Rename that container before. All right. Okay, so we are now at the stages to install DSFW. Now the install is broken up into two pieces. We have our YAST piece, and we have a provisioning wizard piece. The YAST piece will go through and actually install the RPMs and do the configuration. We as far as what we want to name our tree, if we're doing a new tree, name our domain, where we're setting it up, where we're mapping it to. All this is accomplished in the YAST section. So as you can see, we select Domain Services for Windows, and several services are already selected automatically. Do not uncheck these. There are a couple that you could get away with. I still would just leave them. DNS has to be there. eDirectory has to be there. Again, eDirectory cannot have resided on this server before. If you try and clean up eDirectory, there are several files to completely remove eDirectory. We're talking about removing the dib directory, removing basically anything, the var op Novell eDirectory, removing that whole container, removing the Nicky, removing the etc sysconfig Novell directory. You have your sysconfig files in there, clearing those up so that eDirectory shows is not installed. There's just a lot to it. So it's best to start with a fresh server. So eDirectory, iPrint, this is one that you could get away with not installing. It does no harm. It just takes another minute or two to install the RPMs, and that's it. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to configure it. The other one I'd say is Remote Manager. I would highly recommend having Remote Manager. It's a great tool. It gives you a lot of information, so don't remove it. Otherwise, as I say, that's why I say just select this and install, and then go for the install. Now there are some limitations on what else you can install. Really, your domain server should only be or domain controller should only be for authentication. You cannot install Novell CIFS and Novell Samba. That is a conflict, or AFP. You can install iManager. It's recommended you not install iFolder or FTP. However, I've seen those services working on a domain controller, so it is possible. Or net storage. Again, it's listed in the documentation as not supported. It has not been thoroughly tested, really tested at all. But there are people that have installed these services and have them working. Quick find, net storage. But if it has anything to do with Samba relations, file systems per se, other than NSS, it will cause a conflict. So do not do it. Okay, so this will conclude this part of the, well, let's go a little further. I'll go through and install the RPMs, and we'll get the install, the configuration section started here. Okay, the install is still going through here. Something to consider when installing DSFW is your password policies. Now, there's a few things I should say. Schema and password policies. We'll talk about schema a little bit later, but in this case, we'll start on our password policies. If you do not have a password policy set up, a password policy will be configured by DSFW. It will be integrated with your default GPO. So if you don't have one, no worries. One will be set up for you. However, users will not be able to authenticate automatically into the domain. They'll first have to generate their UP, which is just logging in again. If you with your Novell client, if you log in, or if you change the password, the UP password, we'll demonstrate that later on as far as how to accomplish this. In our setup, what we have is a UP for universal password that's assigned to Novell. This is just to make it simple as far as the names are, and a UP at the B level. Now, if you're familiar with password policies, you'll understand that there's a hierarchy to the password policies. It starts with the user. Whatever's set at the user is law. I mean, that is the overriding rule. From there, it goes to the container, and if it's assigned at this at this container, only users within this container will receive that password policy. Now, to explain that a little clearer, users in these containers below it will not receive the password policy. Only the users directly under A will receive it. Now, you can also assign it at containers that are partitioned. That is the next level. This behaves slightly different than assigning it at the container. What will happen is your password policy will flow to all users within this partition. So every user that's directly underneath the O equals Novell, so all these users, all the users in A, all the users in the AA, AB, AC, and if we had other containers below it, they would all receive this password policy. This would be their password policy. Something besides looking at in iManager, see what the password policy is. If we look at the properties, and this is what is keyed off of when this specific attribute, when a password policy is read to see where the password policy is assigned, is this right here, the NSPM password policy DN. As you can see, it's UP Novell. If we look at B, where we have our other password policy assigned, we look at this attribute. So this is what it's keying off of when you actually go to use your password policy. We'll pick up this will be the end of the third video. We'll pick up the fourth video on actually installing and configuring DSFW.